Now, welcome. So, plenty to get through. New Year is coming and going, and we have Champions Cup upon us. So, Leinster, once again, La Rochelle, Saturday, 5:30. We reckon 40,000 is the latest word. Will attend. That's 5:30 on Saturday. Before that, subsequent to that, but 1 o'clock kick-off on Sunday, Toulon host Munster. So Leinster, La Rochelle Saturday evening and Toulon Munster on the Sunday is how the Champions Cup shapes up from an Irish point of view. And then Challenge Cup, Ulster, who are kind of riding crest of a wave territory, away to Cheetahs. That's on Sunday, as is Connacht away to Montpellier, who go into the weekend in slightly different mood. Happy to say, for the first time this year, Cian Tracey here in studio. Cian, very welcome.
Thanks, Joe.
And Eddie O'Sullivan is somewhere out there. Hey, Eddie.
I'm good, Joe. Thanks.
Should remind you, by the way, the helix.ie, if you want to come to our live show at the end of the month. It's Thursday, the 30th of January. Eddie O'Sullivan will be there. That's all I need to say. There are other guests, but Eddie will be there. So we're looking forward to having you, Eddie. So the helix.ie is where people can book tickets. They're going fast, so do get on board quickly. And as ever, our rugby coverage is with thanks to Energia. They sponsor rugby in Ireland at all levels. Grassroots with the AIL. They are official energy partners to Leinster, to Connacht, to the Irish men's and women's teams. And their Rugby for All initiative welcomes everyone of all abilities to participate in the game. To learn more about Energia's exclusive home energy offer for rugby fans, you can visit energia.ie/rugby. A slightly different, let's go slightly different by way of getting around the houses for a moment, fellas. La Rochelle and Ronan O'Gara pitching up in Dublin once again. Maybe seen of O'Gara's greatest hour as La Rochelle coach, that comeback against Leinster a couple of years ago. Eddie, in 2027, and this is a sign we're all getting old, but in 2027, which is the year of musical chairs in terms of contracts, Leo Cullen, Jack Nienaber, Andy Farrell, Stuart Lancaster, Rog himself, all these contracts are up for obvious reasons in a World Cup year. In 2027, Ronan O'Gara will be 50 years old. Where is he in his career with the view to Ireland job, with the view to does David Humphreys need to get this guy home and into a province somewhere, maybe Leinster, maybe Munster, who knows. Obviously Andy Farrell will probably have first refusal on whether or not he wants to stay on in 27, albeit trying to predict anything is fool's errand. A month is a long time in rugby. But Rog at 50, with the view to where he is in terms of Irish rugby, because it just feels sort of wrong that O'Gara won't be in the country in some shape or form for his entire coaching career, but obviously time is ticking.
Well, it depends on what the view of the IRFU is on this. Rog has done his time at the top end of the game just outside your international rugby. I mean, he's been a huge success in La Rochelle. He's experienced in the Southern Hemisphere. He knows French rugby, which is a tough business to survive in. So he's proven his ability at the top end of the game. The question for the RFU is, do they want him to do a kind of apprenticeship in Ireland before he gets the Irish job? That really is. That's as simple as that. Now, if they do want to do that, they need to get him into his apprenticeship. There's no question or doubt Rog would love to coach Ireland. That is probably at this point, given his amount of time in the club game, might be his raison d'etre is to get into the international game. He hasn't been shy of putting his name out there around other international jobs. But obviously, I would say there's no question or doubt that the Ireland would be the prize for him. And so the question is, I think it has to happen eventually unless he gives up coaching, if he stays on the same pathway. So the RFU want to make him do an apprenticeship here. And then if they're going to do that, based on the way you led into the question, they would have to move reasonably quickly on that to get him in at the game here. Now, on the other hand, if David Humphreys goes, you know what, we know his form, we know what he's capable of, he doesn't have to prove anything to us, we could bring him in cold into the Irish job. He's an Irishman, he knows the scene, he probably knows most of the players. So that to me is the question as to whether he comes back and does an apprenticeship or not, is what to do if you want. There's no question or doubt in my mind that Rog would jump at coming back to Ireland, getting under the table, his feet under the table in some way, shape or form, but he wouldn't, Oreo might say, to come back straight into the job cold. I think we might take it. So it really is down to David Humphreys' thinking on this. That's where I would put it. And if Humps wants him to do an apprenticeship, he has to move sooner rather than later. If he doesn't, it doesn't really matter. He can hold off on it for a while.
I don't think there's any great need for him to do an apprenticeship. Do you?
No, I don't actually. That's my point, is
Yeah.
that he's proven his case. I mean, fellas have come into coach Ireland with less with, I suppose, less experience at the level he's at, and probably less success at the level he's at as well. So, he doesn't have anything to prove about his ability at that level of the game. And I mean, international rugby is different, and there's a different set of skills around it in many ways. But having said that, no one's doubting his ability. So if you think he's good enough,
Yeah.
I don't think he needs an apprenticeship, to be fair. And maybe the apprenticeship in Ireland might be the best for him, because where does he land? Where do you put him?
Because I don't think he necessarily wants to go in at Munster. Now, I'm not speaking for him, but certainly a couple of years ago, I'm not sure he was looking at Munster and looking at the financial backing and look at the situation there and thinking that is a good place for me to further my career. So
But it's a complicated place, Joe, to go, not because it's Munster, but because he's a Munster man. Like, if he were to land in Munster, like, it gets, like, the difference with him landing in Munster and some stranger of a coach, like the current coach, is that there's no expectations around the new coach if he's not from there. But if Rodgers landed in Munster, there's a whole plethora around it about what he's going to do, what he's going to achieve. It'd be a massive expectation around it, which is probably, when we put it, way ahead of where Munster actually are. So he'd be suddenly under the goal immediately. And then if it was an instant success, that could affect his apprenticeship for the big job. So I couldn't imagine him being reticent about Munster. Not that he doesn't love Munster; he's not a Munster man, and he loves to see Munster succeeding. But it would be a difficult gig for him. And then, do he go into Leinster as a Munster? I mean, he's always going to carry the Munster flag where he goes. So where does he land in Ireland to give him that apprenticeship if the IRFU want it? And I don't think he needs it, and I don't think it's an easy landing spot either, really.
How do you see it, Cian?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's pretty clear that I think if Ronan O'Gara wanted the Munster job over the last few years, I think there was ample opportunity. You look at the amount of coaching changeover that's happened. I think Munster would have been mad if they didn't pick up the phone and ring Ronan O'Gara, but I think he equally would have been mad if he had taken the job, because I think there's an element of heart ruling head sometimes when it comes to decisions like this. But everything you hear from him, his family are very settled, a bit like Andy Farrell in Dublin. His family love life in La Rochelle, a beautiful part of the world to live. The job he's done has been outstanding. I know more recently it's been tougher, it's a bit more of a rebuild, but the success that he brought to what is a pretty much a small town. I think last week they were celebrating, there was a 10 years selling out their home venue. Like, Ronan O'Gara has been a big part of that. So I think when he looks at the Munster structures, maybe the talent pool that was there, I think he probably would have understood the scale of the job that he would have had on his hands if he had come back. Now, I agree with both of you. I don't think that there would necessarily be a need for him to do an apprenticeship, if that's what you want to call it. But if I put my IRFU hat on, I think that they would much rather he did an apprenticeship in Ireland. If you look back over the last few years, the way that succession planning is going, the way Simon Easterby stepped up when Andy Farrell was away, the way Paul O'Connell stepped up when they were both away on the Lions tour. So I'd say they would much prefer if O'Gara had a job in Munster, Leinster, if that's where it would be. I think O'Gara would probably have to, he might admit this himself as well, rein himself in a little bit, I think, if he was going to be the Ireland head coach, because his disciplinary record in France has been very checkered, to say the least. Even recently he was in hot water again. I think that's something the IRFU would probably look at as well, that they would expect certain standards from their coach, where it's a bit more mad in France, isn't it? We see stuff like that more regularly. So there are things I think the IRFU would have to consider. But I think Eddie's right. He went down to Crusaders, did a lot of good work down there with Scott Robertson, who he's very close with, the All Blacks head coach. Went to Racing, obviously, and it's the culture he's created within La Rochelle. Because Eddie's right. Look at the struggles that Stuart Lancaster had when he went to Racing over the last couple of years. To go in as a foreign coach in France, it's very, very difficult to be a success, and he's done it brilliantly. He's managed a lot of big egos in that La Rochelle dressing room, but he's also managed a lot of different nationalities. I mean, it's not there's a lot of French players in it, don't get me wrong, but he's got Pacific Islanders, he's got Will Skelton, he's got Ultim Delan, an Irish player, Jack Noel, and he's meshed them all together absolutely brilliantly. So I still think his stock is extremely high, albeit La Rochelle are definitely in a bit of a rebuilding process at the moment.
So this conversation gets onto shaky ground, obviously, in that, trying to predict the future is perilous. But say 2027, if that goes very well and Andy Farrell kind of navigates this rebuilding phase and it's a good World Cup, you know, the draw is very favourable, maybe it's an epic semi-final defeat or maybe even a World Cup final, and Farrell says, I want 4 more years, then I think Andy Farrell gets 4 more years. I think that's his, he has,
or if he wins it, well, you stop short.
Or if he wins the World Cup. Yeah, that won't come back to bite us. But Farrell gets first refusal. But things always don't work out. So say Farrell moves on, he gets a different offer, he wants to try something new, or say the thing implodes and there is a vacancy in 2027. Like, so the Easterby thing, Eddie, I mean, it's hard to know how attached the IRFU are to this idea of, well, Farrell came from under Schmidt, so the Easterby from under Farrell, we really like that. Mm-hmm. So the extent to which Easterby is a factor is a question mark. And then on Rog, so Cian used an interesting line there, but that he'd have to rein himself in. Do you think there's any kind of would the RFU, like, just with Farrell, with Schmidt, there's been these guys are kind of like just perfection. You know, they're whiter than white in every kind of way. Rog can give, like, and we love it as media, he can give very emotional interviews. He can have, you know, the referee kind of stuff. He's a big presence in the media, even as La Rochelle coach. He's doing, you know, radio. He'll do columns in the Examiner. He's kind of he's a unique kind of person, isn't he? Like, he has just there's a little bit of box office to him. Do you think that the RFU would like that about him, or do you think they'd be cautious about that when it comes to Rog?
Well, I think they would be cautious. I think that's the reality. Although, to Cian's point about his disciplinary record in France, I think that is a problem. Yeah, you'd have to. What he does in France, he could not possibly even consider doing if he was coach of the national team. It'd be chaotic. He don't want to do that. No, Roger's no duh. I mean, he's a smart guy. He knows well that wouldn't fly. And I think that, to me, is not something that would take him out of the Irish job. I mean, I don't think that the interview say, well, we know his form, it's never going to happen. I mean, that can be all managed, and Roger will understand that had to be a change of tack there. And the RFU know that's almost like a conversation that'll be had, like, Roger, if you get this job, like, and plus the fact he's not going to be on the sideline, he's going to be stuck up in the stand like every other coach. So, like, I think that, to me, is a bit of a canard in terms of that might stop him getting the job. I don't think it's stopping getting the job. The question about someone like Simon, who is, I believe, a very, very strong coach as well, would know the squad, would have huge respect. I think, the RFU have to keep their options open here. And I think there's an element of that. I mean, it's Paul O'Connell as well as in the frame, although maybe Paul's stock wouldn't be as high as Simon's on that. They have to say, like, we can't say, okay, our next guy in 27, if Andy goes, our next man up is Rog, because you just don't know. Like, Rog could say, well, I've changed my mind. We could possibly say that, or my family situation has changed. So they've got to back a few horses here. And it'd be in their interest to have 2 or 3 strong horses ready to come in if Andy Farrell goes. And then they're in a strong position that if one guy doesn't work out, they have another guy. Because what you don't want is you put all your money on the follow-up guy, something goes wrong for him. It could be a personal thing, could be a rugby thing, and then you go, where are we going to go next? So I would think the RFU are playing their cards close to their chest here. They'll have possibly 2 or 3 guys. Maybe Stuart Lancaster comes into the frame if he has a big run in Connacht for a couple of years, So suddenly the RFU will be smart here to not put their money on one guy as a backup, have 2 or 3 of them. So it could be, in their mind at the moment, it could be Rog, it could be Paul, it could even be Stuart Lancaster. And as Cian says, and you said, if Andy Farrell blows it out of the park in the next World Cup and he wants to stay on, there's not even a conversation.
Yeah.
So I think the RFU are playing their cards close to their chest, and they're not throwing their name onto anything yet, which wouldn't make any sense anyway.
Kind of a hard question to answer, but, like, so, the kind of what are they, kind of I don't even know what you call them, the worries, say, over Rog and coaches, or being that more kind of out there interviewee and presence. I think, as Eddie said, O'Gara's incredibly smart. He'd rein it in. He'd understand it's a slightly different position. So that's all fine. He has proven himself unbelievably with La Rochelle, as you've detailed, Cian. Like Easterby, I think the whole country, you couldn't but respect Easterby. You hear great things about Easterby. Lancaster similarly might have that run with Connacht. There could be other candidates. You kind of wonder where, like, public sentiment comes into this. Like, the whole country, I think, if Farrell moves on, and again I emphasise it's Farrell's as first refusal on this. I'm not rushing him out the door by any means. But I think the whole country for a couple of years now has felt Rog, Ireland. I want to see that. You wonder where that comes into thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't a coincidence that he signed that most recent long-term contract until 2027. It's clearly with, I would imagine from his point of view, with the hope of getting back into Ireland. And you're right, it will be Andy Farrell's first refusal, unless something goes horribly wrong this year and next year. But I'd be surprised, like from this remove, if Andy Farrell stayed on for another World Cup cycle. And I know he's extremely happy in Dublin. His family are. Gabriel, his son, is in school. Like, he's going to be at a crucial age and all that. But he's a very smart guy as well. And I mean, he was obviously the assistant coach under Joe Schmidt. It's a long time to be within the same environment. And I wonder from Andy Farrell's point of view, would he want to shake things up for himself as well? I think Paul O'Connell is going to be a big player in all of this. And now I can already hear people screaming at me, well, Paul O'Connell needs to kind of get his side of the house right. And that's absolutely fair in terms of the line out. But he obviously did the summer tour to Georgia and Portugal. Now, around that tour, you know, it was kind of, he had turned down the opportunity to go on the Lions with Andy Farrell for his own personal reasons, and going on a 2-week tour to, like I said, Portugal and Georgia suited him much better than going away for a couple of months to Australia. Now, Paul O'Connell has always been kind of non-committal in terms of what his future aspirations are in terms of wanting to be a head coach, but around that tour, I got a chance to sit down with him just before Ireland left, and I went on the tour as well and was covering it. His stance has kind of shifted very slightly in that he's kind of saying now, one day I might wake up and I want to be a head coach, whereas before he was very much like, oh, I'm happy enough being an assistant coach. And I wonder if getting that taste, albeit it was very much off Broadway, has kind of given Paul O'Connell maybe a little bit of a kick as well. Say, you know what, I wouldn't mind being a future Ireland coach. Now, I mean, the dream thing, I think, for a lot of people, certainly Munster supporters, would be Ronan O'Gara and Paul O'Connell ticket would be amazing to watch. But it would be a real shame if Ronan O'Gara isn't brought back into the Irish system, particularly when his stock is so high. He's an Irish legend. And
my point is, the clock is ticking.
The clock is ticking.
You know, he's been coaching now for maybe 13 years. He's 50 years old and 27. He's often, I got to learn my trade. I got to do all that's done. He's more than proven himself. Like, you go another 4 years, suddenly he's 55, and ageism comes into it, and then you just would be kind of sitting there if in 10 years' time his stock hasn't, or he takes a test match somewhere else. You would be kind of sitting there going, how have we not had Ronan O'Gara at the helm of Irish rugby in some shape or form?
And that could happen because Ronan O'Gara has been strongly linked, and he's put himself out there for the Australia job. But even recently enough, I think it was Izzy Dag, the former All Blacks winger, was on his podcast or radio show saying the All Blacks should be getting Ronan O'Gara back to coach the All Blacks attack, because they're in kind of a bit of a muddle under Scott Robertson, who he knows very well as well. I'd imagine France would probably be interested. I don't necessarily know his head coach, because they like to have a Frenchman as their head coach. So other teams and other nations are monitoring Ronan O'Gara's situation very, very closely as well. It's not like Ireland have, a free pass to get him here whenever they want. And I do think they need to strike, and it would be brilliant if they could get him back in whatever shape that is.
Because I think Eddie, his age, he'll feel like now is the time. Do you know what I mean? I don't suspect he's going to say, I can bide my time for another 4, 5, 6 years.
Yeah,
I think at club level, I mean.
Well, I think it's not even so much to do with age, as an awful like me would say. But I think it's the fact that where he is in his development. And you're right, he's done all the heavy lifting on that side of it. Now, if he gets the job, that's another days of heavy lifting. But to transition from being the rookie coach, 13 years ago, now to being an established head coach with huge success at a big club in France, he's proven himself. So I think the time for him is right in his own head, yeah. And he definitely... He's interesting. He's thrown his name at another few jobs out there as well, like Australia being the obvious one, which would be like a long, long way from Ireland. But having said that, I think in his own mind, he thinks he's ready for it. And to hang around another 4 years, not that he couldn't do, but it doesn't suit him. And 4 years is a long time as well, So, I think it's getting to kind of critical mass. But I still go back. My point is, does David Humphreys feel he needs to be in Ireland to assume the reins after Farrell? And if he does, you're right, there's no huge pressure to make a move sooner rather than later. But if he doesn't, and I would I don't think he does. You could sit on that for another year or two and wait and see what happens in the World Cup. And in the lead into the World Cup, you could be having those conversations. I mean, it doesn't. It's not. It's only critical if they want him back here.
Yeah.
That's my take on it.
Yeah, well, look, there's no great impetus to this conversation beyond La Rochelle happened to be in Dublin this weekend. So, I mean, we're not hearing anything, I should emphasise, if you're wondering where all this is coming from. Just a last one on it, Eddie. When you're Ireland coach in, say, 06, 07, and you've watched O'Gara come through and blossom into the player he was around then, if I'd said to you of that Irish squad you had, say, 06, 07 territory, if I'd asked you then, give me your top 3 fellas in this squad. Who are going to be coaches here?
Yeah, it's interesting you put it like that. I would say O'Connell, Raj, and Easterby.
Go away.
Honestly, yeah. I think it was a question if they wanted it, but you could tell that they had the knowledge, the personality, the drive. They're very driven guys, very, very meticulous, know what they want. They are very harsh on themselves as players. Like the hardest thing with getting them is to enjoy a victory because they're always looking at what they did wrong. They could have done better in that 80 minutes. So yeah, the 3 of them doesn't surprise me. I thought Dave Humphreys probably was another guy, but he did go in and get out. Had Hum stayed in coaching, but I don't know what changed his tack on that. But he's another guy I thought could have easily come through and coach Ireland again. Very measured guy, great knowledge, good communicator. So they're probably the 4 guys. But at that stage, 6, 7, the Holmes had moved on. He retired. But yeah, they're the kind of guys that spring to mind off the top of my head. I'm sure I might have missed somebody, but they're the ones that jump out at me, actually.
Funny. Oh, interesting. Give us an insight into O'Gara's personality then around that time, I guess, because you're seeing him, through his 20s, really.
Yeah.
Your sense of him.
Well, I think when he came in and he got his first cap, I remember he was getting ready to get his first cap under Warren Gatland, and we were training at Dublin Airport on one of those horrendous fields out there on a Monday, and he got a bang on the knee, and it delayed him coming into the team, actually. I think he might have missed a couple of weeks. But at that time, like any young 10 who were realising that if you're going to get this gig as 10 on the Irish team, there was a massive gig. He had a bit of self-doubt about him. You could tell that he was nervous. He was not sure. He needed reassurance. But I think once he got more time under his belt, you could see he grew into this thing about, I like to call it like this ability to run a game, which a 10 has to have. Now, a 9 can run a game as well, but it's a lot harder at 9 the way the game has developed. Because I remember years and years ago when Gareth Edwards was at the end of his career, he literally ran the Welsh team. He was so knowledgeable. I mean, he only gave the ball to the 10 when he felt like it, and everyone was happy with that. But the game has evolved so much that your 10 now is your quarterback, and the 9 really can't do that. So he grew into that role, and the thing about him that drove him is ultra competitive, perfectionist, very hard on himself. So if he's hard on somebody else, they take it because he's going to be hard on himself. And you saw Johnny Sexton as well as another guy, who we don't know like where he'll land in time. Like Johnny's veered away from coaching, veered back to it, seems to have embraced it more. He's another name maybe that's probably not as high up the sheet. But all those guys have one thing in common, was this incredible drive for perfection, attention to detail, never happy. Like, enjoy the moment, but not really happy that it could have been better. And it's an incredible trait to have, because it's not such normal. We all like to, if we achieve something, relax and go, oh, isn't that wonderful? Like, really wallow in it. They didn't ever wallow in success, really. They all just like embraced that, how could I have been better even when I won? And that was something to me that sets a lot of those guys apart. You don't see that in a lot of guys.
And was Rog very vocal in team meetings when it came to things like tactics?
Well, he was always good to bounce ideas off. You could talk to him about stuff and he'd give you feedback, and then he would back that up with the team. And if it came to it, he'd say, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. And like, he would step in. Now, that took time to get to that point, I mean, when he was fighting it out with David Humphreys at the start, it was just about making sure he was in the 10 shirt. But once he nailed down the 10 shirt, he became extremely vocal. He became extremely demanding. And again, we saw probably not as animated as Johnny Sexton was. You know, Johnny was very animated, and we all saw that in Johnny on the field, his ability to really drop the hammer on guys around him, and they all just fell into line. Raj did the same. Now, he had a bit of support around him and Drico as well. We don't forget Drico was on that team, and Drico was just as capable of dropping the hammer on guys as well. So he had a kind of a good assist or a good wingman in Drico for that, and he also had Paul in the pack. You know, so he was more surrounded. Now, that didn't mean he wouldn't have been able to do it if he had to, but he didn't have to because you had those guys either side of him who were able to drop the hammer just as easily as him. And that was a good thing too. You know, it wasn't the one guy. Like, one of the things Woody said to me years ago when he was captain, when I came in as the Irish coach, he said, I'm just sick of talking myself all the time. I need guys around me who will carry the mantle on other issues. And that's one of the things we decided to work on, to build a support group around Woody. So Raj had that support group. Johnny at times, I think, had to run the show himself when you look through the years. And that's why you saw Johnny being more animated, and he became across more like that, like the cranky 10, you know. But Raj is well able to be cranky, I can assure you.
So he pitches up in Dublin. La Rochelle, there's a slight keen question mark as to whether they'll go strongest possible 15. They've had the likes of Tony O and Aldred play the last 3 games. They've got 3 big games coming up domestically. They've won 7 and lost 7 in the top 14. They're in 7th in the table, so obviously domestic concerns are a thing. Equally, and Robin McBride said this yesterday, it's kind of hard to imagine O'Gara sending a weakened side out in the Champions Cup away to Leinster. But we'll know on Friday. From Leinster's point of view, Tyke Furlong seems to have picked up an injury, which is a concern, obviously. McBride didn't elaborate on what that is. Furlong had a pretty terrible year from an injury perspective last year and came good for the Lions. And when he was in studio here, actually, after the Lions, was pretty confident he'd got his body right. Mm-hmm. So, look, that could be just a small knock, or it could be something more serious. We don't know. So Andrew Porter may have to shift over to tight head should Slimani remain a doubt. Clarkson is the only fit tight head prop in the squad at the moment, was the vibe yesterday. Yeah. It's all TBC. But Leinster, La Rochelle, Leinster will go full bore, we know that. Your sense of where they are? Leo Cullen did an interview after the win against Munster at Thomond Park on Premier Sport. It was like really kind of enlightening. He was in kind of bullish enough form, and he was joshing off Simon Zebo, you know. You guys have more Leinster players than you do of Limerick-born players in your team. That, you know, it was just a little bit.
Came into the presser, similar kind
of. Yeah, but I thought, to be fair to him, he held his hands up and he said, "I know we're not playing good rugby. Yeah. Like, I'm under no illusions here." He said, "It's this time of year. We're off the Lions series. We're off in November." He said, "I have no continuity here. I've none. Like, we're changing the team all the time. We are just playing winning rugby. We're getting through this part of the season, and hopefully the rest will come." Was how he framed where Leinster are. And they have sort of been like, they've been bullying teams a little bit. Their scrum is stronger than most teams. They've more power than most teams. They've more power off the bench than most teams. But obviously, if Will Skelton and friends pitch up in Dublin, then we're going to have to see a bit more from Leinster. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and I hope that Will Skelton and all the La Rochelle lads do pitch up. I think the fact that La Rochelle sent a second string team, an Espoirs team even, to the Stormers, it's a little different obviously going to South Africa than it is to Dublin, but I think for all the reasons that we've just spent the first half of the show discussing, Raj, like, this is kind of an audition for him every time he gets to come back to Dublin as well, and I'd be very surprised if he doesn't send the full strength team. But Leinster, yeah, like, I think they've been getting better like every week, but it's very small, like real incremental improvements. I've been at pretty much most of their games over the last few weeks, and like the one that really stands out is the win in Welford Road that I was over. I don't think they got a lot of credit for that, really. Like, that was a Leicester team who are playing quite well in the Premiership actually at the moment. I saw them again at the weekend. It was a Friday night. It was that kind of typical, like, you know, a difficult away place to go. And Leinster were very good. They did what they had done against Munster and Ulster. Sorry, they had stacked their bench, and their bench just made such a big impact. And that's all well and good, but I think it's a risky game to be playing, because I think you hit the nail on the head, Joe, that they're able to do this against the likes of Leicester. They did it against Ulster. I think if Ulster had a stronger bench, they might have beaten Leinster that night in Dublin a few weeks ago. Munster didn't get much off their bench, and the 27th down in Limerick as well. But I think when it comes to, not even necessarily this weekend, but this will be, if La Rochelle pitch up full strength team, it will be a good test of where Leinster are at. Because I think when it gets to the crunch in the last four, we'll say, of the Champions Cup, if it against a Toulouse, against a Bordeaux, I'm not convinced that Leinster will be able to get over the line by playing this style of game, because like they've been winning a lot of scrum penalties, their scrum has been doing well, but we've seen like Ireland's scrum be demolished against South Africa in November. And you talk there about Andrew Porter potentially switching across to tight head. I'd be shocked if Andrew Porter starts at tight head. I think Thomas Clarkson will be nailed on to start, and there's a couple of reasons for that. I'm pretty sure it's Matthew Carley is reffing the game this weekend, and Andrew Porter, whether he likes it or not, has a perception with certain referees, and English referees are the ones who go after Andrew Porter. I think there's an argument to have Andrew Porter on the bench, even behind Paddy McCarthy this weekend. I'd be starting Paddy McCarthy. I think it's something that Ireland should have done in November, to throw different pictures at the referee, because they're going to go in with a preconceived notion, and if Porter is scrummaging on the loosehead side against Weenie Antonio, and if he concedes an early penalty, that could be a disaster for Leinster. So that's why I think they're playing a risky game at the moment. They've been good enough to get away with it, and I think their attack was much better against Connacht last weekend. But the big caveat to that is Connacht defensively at the moment are absolutely atrocious. You might get on and talk about them in a while. So I would take it like a large pinch of salt with how good Leinster's attack looked, and I'd give them full credit for how well it looked. But will it look as good against a defence who won't give Sam Prendergast as much time on the ball? So while Leinster have definitely been getting better, they have won each of their last 7 games since losing to Munster in Croke Park, and have been getting better. I'm still not convinced they're anywhere near where they need to be if they want to win the Champions Cup, and probably the URC as well, to be honest.
Yeah. Eddie, what do you want to say about this game then?
We're talking about Leinster, just bouncing off what Cian said there. I don't think Leinster's current form is any indication of winning the European Cup. I think Leo knows that. And I think too, he's right, his defence is right, that they're constantly rotating, they're managing a huge number of internationals. But I think the problem for Leinster has been is that their season is going to be judged on the European Cup. That's a fact. I mean, the URC isn't going to wash this year. They have to win the European Cup. So there's massive pressure on them. The problem for Leo is trying to get that team on the field to play together. I know he shot himself in the foot, I think, last year with that. But by not putting his best foot forward against Northampton. But having said that, it is a tricky job trying to manage all those internationals. It's a tricky job trying to build continuity. But even at that, I don't think Leinster are playing great rugby. And I think there's 2 dimensions to it. And I keep going back to Inabar about this. He's really the head coach. He's the guy calling all the rugby shots. They have built their house on defence. And the defence has worked really well on occasions. But when it's malfunctioned, it's been catastrophic for them, as we saw against Northampton last year. The second part was, even in the recent interpros, certainly Munster and Ulster being a little smarter, they could have unpicked that. I mean, that Leinster defence is very breachable if you play the right move at the right time. And I'm surprised that other teams haven't figured it out sooner. There's a way to break that defence, and I haven't seen any team put together a game plan around it. But Munster had them a couple of times and they shut it down. Had Munster got those away and scored, they could have beaten Leinster. So that defence, to me, is very all or nothing D. And the problem is, when you meet the last 4 of the European Cup and you meet a good team, well put together, and they have a good game plan, you might get unstuck. And the other side of it is, and I agree with Cian on this as well, is their defence has gone backwards under Ninabar. It's become incredibly attritional. It's become primarily one-off. Occasionally they go to the edges, they do a nice reload, and they have a couple of spots out the back. But by and large, they're trying to batter teams into submission. And their scrum is a part of that. And when the scrum gets on top, they will crucify you. But they've had their issues around referees. So there's 3 parts to their game at the moment that are vulnerable. Their scrum is vulnerable on the wrong day. Their defence is vulnerable on the wrong day. And their attack has become pretty predictable. And I don't think they're going to batter their way to European Cup against big teams like they batter through URC teams.
Yeah.
And I take all that on board, that Leo has his hands full trying to manage his resources. But I don't know if Leinster's DNA at the moment is what we expect Leinster's DNA to be, which is full frontal assault with the ball, regardless of casualties, and a crazy blitz defence, and everything hinges on it. And I just not sure that's a good fit from where they are.
Yes, and what is the move that, or the attack that will expose Leinster's defence? You said you haven't seen teams pull the trigger on that very often.
Well, they play. It's a very it's extreme blitz, and it's very narrow because it's a blitz, and they do a really good job slowing the rucks, so they get on the offside and they launch like mad dogs in a meat house. But a couple of times against Munster, Kieran Frawley was the full back. He stopped the football with a tackle, and outside Frawley there was two players in 20 or 30 metres of space. That ball gets out of there, it's over. It's a 2-on-1 running. Now the reason you get out of there is, getting too technical, is that Munster threw the spot pass one channel too far in. You throw that spot pass one channel further out, and that opens up. Well, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole on spot passes and channels, but there's teams almost breaking them. If they were a little bit smarter, they would get them a lot more. And the problem when you get a blitz defence, when you break it, it's a bust. It's very hard to go. They have this. They do very well in Leinster, and it's a great term. It's called the turn and burn. It's when they get busted, like 5 guys turn and they chase the corner flag like their hair's on fire. And that saves them at times, and they have the athletes for that. But I just think on the big day out against the better teams, those turn and burns won't save you all day. And once a team can get around the corner on you, you're in serious trouble. And I can see that happening again to them unless something changes, and it's not changing. And I still go back to my point. I just don't like that they're playing with the ball. They're playing a performance of contestables, which they're good at. Gibson Park's a great kicker. But they're playing full frontal assault rugby, one-off runners, battering teams to death. I don't know, that gets them over the line at the end of the season against the big dogs.
Okay.
A key part just to mention, Joe, that Eddie mentioned as well there is the breakdown. Like Leinster have become experts at pushing the legalities to the absolute limit, and I think over the Interpros over Christmas they had Irish referees and there was a little bit more leeway, particularly down in Thomond Park on the 27th. I mean, some of the stuff that Leinster got away with was unbelievable, really. Now that's good play and all that. They played to the referee, but again, I go back to the referee this weekend, Matthew Carley. He is not going to allow Leinster use the term "make the breakdown" a shit fight. That's part of what Jacques Dean Arbour's DNA, as Eddie touched on there, around the defence. And I just don't think they'll get away with doing a lot of the stuff that they're doing.
I think that's a great point. Okay. That's a great point, because they're, as King said there, when they turn the ruck into a barroom brawl, the ball is 2 seconds slower and the line gets set and they're off the line. If a referee comes in some Saturday and says, enough of that, this breakdown is going to be pristine, anyone mucks with the ruck is going to get penalised, and they can't get that traction, and the other team get quick ball, then that blitz defence becomes a lot less effective. All possible potholes for them to fall into.
Yeah, okay, really interesting. Well, we'll see what teams are named on Friday and go from there. So that's 5:30 in Dublin on Saturday. Just as we, before we jump to, I've kind of divvied this up, by the way, as Leinster beat Connacht 52-17 and Ulster beat Munster 28-3. So a quick word on Connacht. It's now, the recent form, the away loss to the Dragons, the defeat at home to Ulster, and then conceding 52 away to Leinster has kind of taken... not that there was huge sheen before, but taking some sheen away from Lancaster's start. Their next URC game will be Leinster again on the 24th of January to, I suppose, celebrate the opening of the stadium. We had Lancaster on the show a couple of weeks ago, and they almost have that date circled in the calendar as a real, chance to inject a kind of bit of momentum into their season in some ways. They obviously have Challenge Cup in the meantime. I just really want to play you a clip of Ian Madigan talking to Will over Christmas. A very interesting observation here. In effect, as you'll hear, he's talking about Lancaster and the approach. This is my word, not Ian's, but almost is it a bit dated with the way rugby is going, and almost so many phases of rugby, a kind of that attack we saw maybe a couple of years ago, which was very much in vogue, and our Connacht almost gassing themselves out in games. So here's Ian Madigan just talking generally about what he's seeing from Connacht in attack, and then obviously if they're tiring themselves out, that factors into how well they can defend too. So here's Ian Madigan speaking to Will over the Christmas.
What was working for Ireland back in 2023, what was working for Lancaster with Leinster through 18 to 23 is very different to what's working now. And we've spoken about it already. Going high into the phase count is in my opinion, tiring the team out and leaving them exposed defensively. And they score the majority of their points after 6+ phases. 60% of tries are scored within 3 phases. Yet Connacht are scoring their points, the majority of their points, after 6+ phases. It's taking them a long time to score. So when you're looking at them, like, they're putting together really good passages of play. So they could start attacking from the halfway line and move the ball to width, and they're progressing forward, and they get to the opposition 22. And finally, you get into the red zone, and you want to be targeting, when you're in the red zone, you want to be coming away with points between 30 and 50% of the time. But the issue with Connacht is it's required so much energy for them to get in there, because it hasn't been efficient, that the system is falling on its face because the guys are tired.
Well, Eddie, something in that?
Well, I think there's good stuff in that. One is, I'd say that we're seeing Lancaster's style of rugby as a coach. If you saw the way he coached Leinster so successfully, I think I remember going back when he kind of described it as creating chaos and letting players, getting an open game, a structure, but a rather loose structure, players able to riff and go into different positions. And you saw Leinster do that so well. Why? Because Leinster had the horses for that. I mean, you were always looking at basically the guts of an international team playing a club side, and that will work. And I think he may have to recalibrate on that around. I don't think Connacht can play that style of riffing rugby, to call it for another word, where there's a loose structure and they get to play a lot off on the ball, and guys making reads and playing through gaps and getting hands free. It's a lovely style of rugby if you have the horses to play it. And I think that to do that against good defences, you do have to go into a high ruck count. You do have to go through a lot of phases to break them down. And eventually you get them if you're on the front foot and you're making good reads and you're getting the ball to space, and all those things are coming together, like we saw Leinster doing under his leadership. Or his attack at the time. I think he's trying to implant the same system into Connacht, and I think that it's not sticking at the moment. No, it's very early days, to be fair. I mean, let's be fair. Joe Schmidt had a huge problem when he started in Leinster, trying to get his style of rugby across to Leinster. It took, like, he was on the trap door after 2 or 3 months. So Stuart is only in the gate down in Connacht, so they probably be a little more patient. But he may have to start thinking: are these guys able to play that style of rugby, or do we have to pivot away? It doesn't have to change a lot, but maybe he needs more specifics around what they're doing. The second thing is one of the problems is, and this is a problem for when you get into the red zone, there's less space there, and rugby now has become a battle of hand-to-hand combat in the red zone. Pick and jam, blast. And again, I think Connacht can get into the red zone, and the problem is, can they battle their way against big teams? And the answer is probably that no. They're going to have to work very, and that means the ruck count goes up again. Defensively, there's a point to be made there, Ian makes, that they're kind of burned out on D because they put so much effort into their attack. That's a reasonable point, but I still think their system is not good. They're not making good reads. They're not numbering off properly. They're missing tackles. Like, they're the 3 things that'll kill your defense. Is 1, if you're not making good reads; 2, if you're missing tackles; and 3, if you can't number off properly. Like, if you could fix those things, life's a lot easier. I think their defense needs an overhaul. And if you're going through massive ruck counts to try and get a score, and then you're conceding scores easily, it's a double whammy. And they've got themselves in that little hole at the moment. So he may have to recalibrate his view on the attack. It doesn't mean he mightn't get there at some point, but he probably is not going to get there as easy as he thought. And their defence has to shift. There has to be an improvement in their defence.
Okay.
And I think that could change things for them. But in the moment, they're in a bit of a hole. And it's the old story. They need a break to get out of it. And if I hate to think they're hanging their hat on beating Leinster to get out of the hole.
Yeah, well, we'll see how they go. Montpellier Sunday, and they'll go looking for results in the Challenge Cup after they threw away that lead to Ospreys when they were 21-0 up. So that's Connacht on Sunday. Ulster beat Munster 28 points to 3. We'll finish on Ulster. They're the happiest story, I think, in Irish rugby at the moment. As for Munster, they're away to Toulon. Back-to-back Interpro defeats, Leinster and Thomond Park, and then Belfast. Terrible defeat in Belfast. They're 6th in the URC table. They go to Stade Felix Mayol, where, to be fair, 2 seasons ago, and it wasn't a good season necessarily 2 seasons ago, they had one of their best performances of the year. Toulon rested players against La Rochelle in that 66-0 defeat. The expectation is they're very much targeting beating Munster, and that will make the away trip to Gloucester for them redundant. They did obviously beat Bath at home, and we know what Bath did to Munster. They beat Bath by 45 points to 34. It was a really, it was a lively game. It was a great game a couple of weeks ago. So, Keane, you were down in Munster yesterday. You're writing about Munster. It's funny. There's a sense they're having a good season and it's going well. And I think at the top of that list is the win against Leinster back in October. But when you strip that away, not least after this Christmas, there's probably how well is it going actually under Clayton McMillan, who's still obviously just getting his feet under the table. You looked at an interesting stat in your piece, which is online or in the paper today, that in 12 games, McMillan has used 48 players. He's rotated a lot, in part by necessity, I'm sure, but also he said when he arrived at the province, I don't want to make assumptions about any players. My aim here is to give everybody game time. I want to get a good, thorough look at everybody and see what they can do. So maybe that has been an aspect of the iffy form. And he said after the defeat to Ulster, maybe I'm going to rotate a little bit less going forward. So that was an interesting angle on Munster. It really was a terrible performance in Belfast.
Yeah, and I suppose within all those players that he's used, Joe, 48, like you said, and one of those games was against Argentina, 15, just for context in case people are wondering, where there was 11 changes made. But they've averaged 7 changes per game, and even if you stripped the friendly against Argentina out of that, it would still be 7 changes per game, per competitive game in the URC and the Champions Cup. That's a hell of a lot. And
is that higher than average?
I would imagine so, yeah. And I think his rationale is completely fair, because now players can't say, well, I didn't get a chance here to impress the new boss, because I think he would have had a certain... He admitted when he came in that he knew the Ireland internationals, of which there aren't too many obviously at the moment in the Munster squad, but outside of that he was honest enough to admit that he didn't really know the players and he wanted to give everyone a fair chance. I think now he's done that, but they need to, if you picked out the Ulster game, Joe, they looked like a team who had never even met each other, let alone trained together. They were just so they lacked cohesion, they lacked rhythm, and that's going to happen when you're making so many changes week to week. Now, I had written that piece before I went down to Limerick, so I wish I could claim that I had some sort of inside knowledge that Clayton McMillan ended up, which I gather because Mike Prendergast told us yesterday, delivered that message to the players at a meeting yesterday and said the time for heavy rotation in effect is over now. We're now going to start seeing more of a settled team, which again makes complete sense. And I think every Munster supporter would be fully on board with that. I think there's certain areas in the team where they need to figure out, I think, what they're doing going forward, because I think the reliance on Tadhg Byrne is completely obvious. I'll just leave that to the side. But on Craig Casey and Jack Crowley has never been more apparent than it has been when those two guys haven't played this season. And I think, you look at JJ Hanrahan played with Paddy Patterson in Belfast last weekend, and they really struggled. Now, I know the pack struggled as well, but they had no control from half-back at all. JJ Hanrahan is 33 now. He's had plenty of chances. I would say his best days are behind him. Paddy Patterson has been at Munster a good few years now, has never really sort of convinced that he's up to, being Munster's first choice 9. You've a pair of 23-year-olds there from Ennis in Ethan Coughlin and Tony Butler, scrum half and out half, and They've played bits and pieces, but Munster have gone into their 2 biggest games of the season against Bath and Leinster in Thomond Park without a recognised backup 10 on their bench. Now, they got away with it, but that's not to say they're going to get away with it. Craig Casey is covering 10. So Clayton McMillan needs to figure out, and I use the halfbacks as example, are Ethan Coughlin and Tony Butler the future? If they're not, then what is the succession planning here? Because clearly a 33-year-old JJ Hanrahan isn't the future behind Jack Crowley. And I think when you're changing so many, Joe, I kind of feel sorry for some players who are coming in. Look at Michael Milne, who's come in from Leinster, Michael Alatoa, who's come in from Claremont, Lee Barron, who's come in. It takes time to develop partnerships with players, and the obvious thing is to look at a centre partnership, a halfback partnership, but you speak to any proper hooker worth their salt, they will tell you the amount of reps that it takes in training, and more importantly in games, to know the feel of certain guys, like what binds feel like. And Munster just haven't had that across the course of the season. And again, I can understand the rationale, but I was really encouraged when I went down, particularly because I had written the piece and then it backed up what I felt, that now is the time that we need to start seeing more cohesion, more partnerships, because as Prendergast said, it's not the only reason why Munster's attack has been so stodgy over the last few weeks, because the frustrating is they haven't been able to build on that Leinster game where they were outstanding. Like, that was one of the best Munster performances in quite some time. They're going to a bear pit that is Toulon this weekend, and they can't afford to be off it in any way at all, because they were hammered in Bath, they were hammered in their last away game in Europe, which was the quarter-final defeat to Bordeaux last season. And if they're not on it this weekend, a Toulon team who are extremely difficult to beat at the Mayall could put a score in them as well. So I think they've kind of had a fire put up them, I think, over the last few days, particularly in light of the performance. They'll have the likes of Tyg Byrne, Craig Casey and Jack Crowley back this weekend, but they need a response.
Yeah. Whatever about the attack and all that kind of stuff, even just a basic like the kicking game in Belfast, it's genuinely bizarre. I'm not sure they kicked a contestable in the first half hour in those conditions. What do you want to say about Munster, Eddie?
Yeah, not a lot, to be honest. I think Keane nailed it pretty much there. But I think two things I'd say is, one is, unfortunately for Clayton McMillan, he got too good a start to the season. They had a great start and everyone's expectations went through the roof, and then a bit of reality set in. Probably the turning point of that was the Bath result. They got wiped out in Bath, so that, and they've struggled since that game. The Munster game looks like a bit, or the Leinster game looks like a bit of an aberration now. There's certainly the rotation thing for sure. I can see his logic in it, and I think he's every right to do it. But for sure it's over now, because if they start to slip any more this season, they could get a messy season from. So I think there's an element of pressure coming that they need to get a result. But I'm not sure this weekend is the one that's going to turn the corner from. And we know Munster over the years. There's been the false stones. We've all seen they've gone to a game they shouldn't have any business in, and they've pulled it off. But it'll be a tough one this weekend, and they may have to pivot back to the URC to get their mojo back, But I think he has to stop rotating. He has to nail his colours to the mast, and he has to get the team working together. The other thing that I thought worried me in Belfast, they got bullied. Apart from all the technical, tactical, they got beaten up physically, and
like echoes of Bath a little bit.
Yeah, and that's probably the worst thing for a Munster team to suffer. Like, whatever about Munsters, you're going to get the kitchen sink no matter what. The kitchen sink was left in Limerick, I think, up in the Raven Hill.
Ulster kind of feel good so far. Richie Murphy definitely enjoying second season a lot more than first. There just seems to be a real conviction about them. You suspect they're quietly enjoying Challenge Cup over Champions Cup. They're fourth in the URC. There are any number of good stories, really, for Ulster, like, for the McCarthy brothers and the Prendergast brothers, the Ward brothers, I think, welcome with open arms. So, even against Munster, the Wards, Bryn and Zach, Bryn number 8, Zach on the wing, were Ulster's top two ball carriers. Zach made 14 carries, Bryn made 13. I saw Gordon Darcy kind of refer to Bryn Ward as like having a Sean O'Brien-like physicality to his carries. He's only 21 years of age. And then on the wing, Zach obviously was playing sevens, played at the Olympics in Paris, and now in his second full season is catching the eye in a big way. Like Richie Murphy said afterwards, they're both incredible ball carriers, my God. And he said of Bryn, who again is 21 and only made his debut in October. I mean, he is fresh on the scene. He said of Bryn, at 118 kgs, he moves quicker than most wingers, you know what I mean? He was a standout player, obviously, for the 20s under Murphy back in 24. Got his place in the academy and now senior debut against the Lions in October. And then Zach on the wing, 3 line breaks, beat 13 defenders. So even those guys alone are catching the eye, and there's more besides.
Yeah, they didn't lick off a stone, I suppose, in terms of who their dad is. And like Zach is a former back row himself, so like you see the power that he has out wide. He's the perfect modern day winger in terms of the power, the size. And you mentioned his sevens background. He was exceptional. He was the standout sevens player over the last couple of years before obviously the IRFU made the programme redundant, unfortunately. And Bryn was standout player for the 20s in 24. Like I said, I think he played 23 as well. Unbelievable around the breakdown. To be fair, he's put on a serious amount of size, and I see the comparisons to Sean O'Brien. They have a guy, James McNabney, who did his ACL in the training camp before the Ireland tour, actually, who's been compared to a modern day Stephen Ferris. People will have seen him. I think he's played 20 times for Ulster. They have a lot of talented players coming through the pipeline right now, and I think what's most pleasing for me from an Ulster point of view is how successful Richie Murphy has transferred the under-20s template into pro rugby. Because look, it's stating the obvious that it's a major step up in every sense of the word, but look how successful the Ireland under-20s have been over the last few years. 2025 aside, Richie Murphy won a couple of Grand Slams, and the way he's went out and got his under-20s coaching staff, I thought that was a bit of a risk personally, purely because I think a lot of Ulster supporters might have been like, be no harm to have maybe an experienced guy in with them. Will what you're doing with the 20s work in pro rugby? But Richie Murphy doubled down, and I don't think he was with all the best will in the world, I don't think he was the sexiest appointment in the world for Ulster supporters. I think he was already in the Irish system, and when he came in for Dan McFarland, it was a bit of like, he filled in on an intern basis, and that obviously went really well. But this is a great story, Joe, for Irish rugby, because we spent the first part of the show talking about Ronan O'Gara and trying to get him back into the Irish system. In many ways, I think Irish rugby has a duty to coaches like Richie Murphy, like Mark Sexton, to find a place for them within the system. Because if you go back to Richie Murphy's predecessors at under-20s level, Noel McNamara, he did brilliant work with the 20s as well. He's now over coaching one of the best attacks in Europe. In fact, the best attack in Europe, because he's working with Bordeaux, the Champions Cup winners. Nigel Carolyn was before that. He's doing brilliant work at Glasgow. Glasgow's attack is regularly one of the best. They won the URC a couple of seasons ago. So you have all these Irish coaches, but they're doing their work outside of the country. So we need to find a way to get them involved. And I think the way that Richie Murphy has transferred the coaches, but also the players and the style of play, because the 20s have been brilliant to watch, and you're kind of wondering, how will that work though when it comes to pro rugby? And I still think Ulster have a way to go, but it's been so refreshing to see, with all the whinging and moaning that's gone on about the direction of travel in the game at the moment with the kicking, Ulster have quietly just been going about doing their thing, and it's been brilliant to watch. And I think they've got their structures in place much better now, and I don't think it's a coincidence that we're starting to see more young guys. Like I mentioned, Dan Soper, I think, is worth mentioning, Joe, as well. He left the senior coaching staff last year, but rather than get rid of him, they gave him a role within the academy and managing that from schools to academy to senior level. So they're streamlining their process much more. And like I said, I don't think it's a coincidence that we're seeing more young players come through. Yeah,
and to be fair against Munster, like when the occasion called for contestables in the air, like there was a kind of nice mix. I'm not, like, it's not to say they're world beaters or they're suddenly favourites for the URC, but they're fourth in the table. It's more given where they're coming from. Like, I mean, in 2018, they're literally been called a basket case by Brian O'Driscoll. I mean, it was rock bottom, and you wouldn't say there's been any great rebound even since then. So you're almost looking at a decade really of Ulster just being a little bit in the doldrums. This is, full house against Munster. Like, the locals are liking what they're seeing. It's kind of the first sense of this is actually starting to move now.
Yeah, I think that for me that they're in a good place, and I think you made a point earlier that it does suit them this year not to be in the Champions Cup. Life's a lot simpler. What could really make life difficult was being a away trip to Toulouse on a Sunday afternoon at the moment. They certainly wouldn't be ready for that. But they're on a good track at the moment. The thing that sticks out for me is I think Richie's doing a great job. I think he's stuck to his guns in terms of his philosophy in the game, and it seems to be fitting well. Like we talked about Stuart Lancaster, maybe not his philosophy not sitting as well with Connacht, could come right in time, but Richie seems to have got the players on the same page. He knows what he wants, they know what he wants, they're buying into it. And the big takeaway for me is this is Ulster rugby kind of feeding off its own development. Like, all these young players starting there. And I thought that the interview after the game, the Munster game, by Ian Henderson, and he's almost pleading to the Irish coaches to look at these young Ulster players coming through. Like, there is a lot of energy in Ulster at the moment coming from the age profile of the guys who are now starting to underpin the strength of the team, and they're all Ulster guys. And Ulster got to a point where at one stage, I remember they lost up in Ravenhill probably 7 or 8 years ago against Munster, and there was only one or two Ulster guys in the pack. And I think that was kind of a watershed moment from them, taking a long time. But they're working back to building an Ulster team out of Ulster. And they've done a really good job at it. And you're seeing the product of that coming through now. And you have a young coach who the guys are buying into. They're playing a really good brand of rugby. There's a way to go yet. We shouldn't get carried away here. But in terms of where this team is headed, you couldn't be but happy for them.
Assuming Kieran Frawley goes in and plays 10 for Connacht and plays there regularly, you could have a situation in a World Cup year where you have Byrne and Prendergast fighting it out at Leinster, but either way it's an Irish 10. You've Jack Crowley at Munster, Frawley at Connacht, and then Jack Murphy at Ulster. Now, he has still only played 20 odd times for Ulster. I mean, he's incredibly young in his career, and you could say, well, father's the coach, good for him, but actually in many ways that makes people suspicious, and there's a kind of crossing.
It's a harder road.
There's a crossing of arms there, saying, all right, kid. Is he potentially international? Is he potentially international caliber, or is it far too early to tell?
Too early to say, to be fair to him. But he's only played, as I say, 20 games. Let's see how he navigates this season, and then where he lands next year in terms of his form and everything. But I'm not saying it's not possible, but I think at the moment you couldn't say for sure. Yeah. But it's a great place for Irish rugby that if you suddenly had, 5 or 6 10s in Ireland all playing at a high level, that's kind of, and that's doesn't happen by accident, to be fair. That's what David Humphrey's job is to try and make that happen in as many positions as possible on the national team.
You might have Joey Carberry there next season as well.
Really, yeah.
I believe Ulster certainly interested in looking to bring him back. I think it's nearly a foregone conclusion that Joey Carberry will probably leave Bordeaux. I think he's been squeezed out in a lot of the big days, particularly the Champions Cup final. I think English clubs will be interested as well, because he's going to become English qualified, which he's made very clear publicly as well, because that would help him in terms of salary caps, getting a contract at the Premiership. So that's certainly one to watch. And it is really the young players that are...
Sorry. Joey Carberry, what madness is this? He can play for England.
Yeah, I think it was his mum born in England or something like that.
So if you're X number of years out of... setup,
he'd be English qualified, which, as I said, it's not necessarily Joey Carberry going to play for England, but it's a salary cap thing, because he'd be EQP or whatever they call it.
Do you think Carberry will look at trying to overtake Sexton is one thing? Do you think Carberry will look at what Ireland have at the moment and think, do you know what, actually I could?
Yeah, because it's wide open, not to go down that rabbit hole at the end of the show, but the out-half situation is as open as it ever been. Look at Leinster at the moment. Would he be
right to think that, though, based on how we think Joe Carberry stacks up?
Andy Farrell was happy to let him go. Yeah. I'm not sure he shot the lights out in Bordeaux. Like I said, he's been squeezed out now. He's behind Mathieu Jalibert, who, if you're to read the French media, there's a good chance that Jalibert could start against Ireland in the Six Nations opener again, not to go down that rabbit hole. So that's just one to watch. But to bring it back to the Ulster and the good vibes, like Stuart McCloskey's playing brilliant rugby, the heartbeat of the team, but it really is these young guys who are driving it, and it's the spine of the team. It's Dave McCann in the back row. It's Tom Stewart, who's playing outstanding rugby. There's a guy who's been really unlucky over the last few years to be overlooked by Ireland. And Jack Murphy's been brilliant as well. Nathan Doak has really stepped up. I think Jack Murphy, in terms of the Irish thing, I would imagine it's still probably too early. The Ireland 15 team are coming back, and they're going to play a game against England the day after Ireland Six Nations opener in Paris. They're playing down in Thomond Park. I think that'd be a great game to see Jack Murphy, because that would be a step up. But the vibes are good in Ulster, and like Mark Sexton has gotten a lot of praise for how well the attack is going. They're top of the charts in the attacking stats across the board in URC. But I think Willie Falloon, another coach who came from the 20s with Richie Murphy, has done a good job with their defence. Like, we're talking about Connacht's defence, how poor it is at the moment. Ulster defensively were terrible for the last couple of years, and lots of it was a mindset thing. And I think Willie Falloon has gone in there and done a really good job, and I totally agree with Eddie. They still have a long way to go when it comes to the crunch, but they're definitely trending in the right direction, and Ulster supporters have every right to be excited, because there's so many young homegrown talents coming through now.
Okay, fellas, super stuff. Enjoy the European action at the weekend. Where are you going, Keane? Toulon, all the tough gigs. Eddie, enjoy it from the couch. Thanks a mil.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Cheers, Eddie.